Well, it's week 3 of the NFL calendar, and the Cincinnati Bengals, in their tough stretch so far, are 1-1. They had a heartbreaking loss in Pittsburgh. We'll talk about that on this week's Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I am Anthony Cosenza. I'm joined by Connor Howe and Scott Schultze as usual. Gentlemen, how are we doing?
I'm good. Ready for football again.
Yeah. Well, good to see you both. Good to see and hear from you both. Scott, you mentioned excited. You're excited for this Sunday in particular?
Actually, I'm excited for a very different reason.
Okay.
Kind of with the hometown thing with the Bengals. They're neighbors, one stadium over, the Cincinnati Reds. So I had to support them. They just set a major league record yesterday, so that's kind of exciting. Most home runs given up in a season. So
there you go. Very nice. Very nice. That's along the lines of 1990s Bengals right there. So
see, if the Padres played in a more hitter-friendly park, I think they would have broken that like every season of their existence.
Yeah, that's true. But
the Cincinnati turnaround's been amazing.
And I'm a loyal Bengals guy, but I'm from Southern California. I got to say, those who reside in the Cincinnati area and follow those teams, those are some of the most loyal fans. So, Scott, kudos to you for still repping the Cincinnati Reds after such a tough season. I can relate, though. The Angels out here are having a pretty tough season themselves. But we're here to talk about football. And this week, the Bengals went to Pittsburgh, and it was an ugly game, both from a playing standpoint and an officiating standpoint. We'll talk more about that in a minute, as well as weather. There were just a lot of weird factors in this game. The Bengals still, through it all, were basically one possession away from potentially tying and sending this game into overtime. Connor, I'll start with you on your thoughts. Pretty admirable comeback by the Bengals, or should have played better and won the game?
Too little, too late, personally, but I think there's always takeaways, and people are going to debate about the referees and all this stuff. And just from my perspective, going into the game, I think a lot of people were really concerned with how are the two teams going to interact with one another. I think that's kind of something that's getting glanced over a little bit is no negative interactions between the two teams throughout the entire game. Both teams were really they seemed friendly. Players were helping each other up after they finished a play. So on that front, obviously the officiating, I think, did a good job. There are definitely some calls that should have gone in Cincinnati's favor, I think, that didn't go their way. But that said, too little, too late. It was really frustrating to see them try to make a comeback because we all kind of knew it was. I mean, even with the Boyd fumble, it was still so far for them left to go down the field. And with AJ Green not really doing anything on Sunday. But on the bright side, we have the knowledge now that Drake Kirkpatrick is at least through 2 weeks a legitimate cornerback, playing super well. He had, I think, a pick, 2 pass breakups, 0 catches allowed, and 3 targets. And I want to say he played the majority, if not all, the snaps. I didn't see the snap counts, but he looked good. Marcus Hunt and the rest of the D-line also looked good again, even though they didn't really. I think Will Clark might have gotten a sack, or maybe no one got a sack, but pressure looked good up front. Linebackers were pretty decent. The whole defense looks really good. Offense needs a little bit of work, more consistency, I would say. But all in all, I think you're 1-1 after playing 2 road games against 2 teams that were playoff caliber teams last year. Obviously, the Jets didn't make it, but they were the best team in the NFL that didn't make the playoffs. So you can't really be that disappointed. They're still 1-1. They didn't win the first 2 games like they have the past couple of seasons. But all in all, I'm happy with the team.
Scott, I'm interested to see if you share Connor's thoughts and optimism with this team. I mean, I have been saying through various posts and on this show that I felt that this 3-game stretch that the Bengals opened the season with this year is pretty brutal, just because the 3 teams they play, but also the fact that their first 2 games were on the road. So your thoughts on the Steelers' loss? Is it crushing to this team's psyche because there was so much time built up and into this game, or should we really look forward to Week 15 when it matters more at the end of the season and some of the stars for both teams are back?
I'd say it's maybe not really crushing. I mean, it's obviously disappointing because you do spend all off season and then all week kind of preparing for the game like you do every game. So any game's tough. But if you kind of look at as a fan, you kind of look at it from the outsider's perspective, well, it's a tough divisional road game. You're in a torrential rain downpour. People were dropping passes. The field has never been the greatest field. Heinz Field's kind of had some issues. You put all that water on it. It's going to be a close, difficult game where anything can happen. And it actually kind of reminded me of the game that New England played in Cincinnati. I think it was maybe 3 years ago, where similar thing. I think New England had a great offense that year, like they usually do. Low scoring game. It was like, I don't know, 10-10, 13-30, something, just really low scoring until the very end. Torrential downpour. It was difficult to see the receivers. Even when you watched it on TV, you could tell there was tons of rain coming down. And then at the very end, I think God parted the skies, and Andy Dalton drove the Bengals down for the game-winning touchdown. And then as soon as the Patriots got the ball, he turned the faucet back on that dumped on them, and they couldn't drive. And so we just
Adam
one of those
Jones
things.
Got that pick to win the game.
Yeah, and in those conditions, it's just hard to say. And like you said, they're on the road. You start 1-1, 2 straight road games against 2 very good teams. And yeah, Steelers are 2-0. The Jets have won every game other than the Bengals game, which they almost won. So, yeah, I think you have to be positive with that. Obviously the negative, I think, would be the running game has been pretty abysmal and didn't look any better. Although I think some of that might be, to me, it kind of seems like some of that's the play calling. I know Sam Peasy's very new to this, but it just seems there are some times where they run the play and the defense knows he runs it. They seem to stack the box. They bring everyone up, and you're like, why would you run into that? And they check into a run, or they run. And I was looking at the stats today on first and 10, second and 10, just how frequently they run, and when they do, they get nothing. And then he said, we want to return to the run game. But at some point, I don't know if you can really force the issue if you're not a power running team. Bodine's obviously had his struggles. We've talked about that before. Ogbuehi is still kind of, as Coach Lewis has said, Ogbuehi's still kind of in his training camp mode. He's still not really there yet. Whitworth's always been more of a great pass protector. You don't have Eifert. You don't have the receivers that you had last year. So you don't have people who are really playing deep. They're playing the run. They know you want to run, and you kind of have to take what the defense gives you, and I just don't see them doing that. So I think that was disappointing. Obviously, a loss is disappointing, but at this point, I'll take 1-1.
I'm kind of in the same boat with you guys. 1-1, especially depending on the outcome of this next game this Sunday against the Broncos, who are 2-0 as well. Depending on the outcome there, you could be feeling pretty good, even though you really wanted that Steelers game. That's always a tough game for the Bengals, and especially going in there into Pittsburgh and trying to battle all these elements against them, and still being one possession away from potentially tying the game at the very end. It's admirable. You want that win, but the Bengals seem to still be competitive, still be fighters till the end, which is what you like to see. I'm with you, Scott. I think the run game has been very disappointing. I think Jeremy Hill has about 53 yards in 2 games, if I'm not mistaken, something in that area. Giovanni Bernard really struggled on the ground, but was excellent as a receiver. So, he's doing some good things there. Aside from the run game, the thing that kind of disappointed me in this loss was the 8 drops by wide receivers. And there was not one that, there wasn't one player that really wasn't guilty of doing it. And AJ Green dropped a pass. CJ Uzama had a couple of drops. Tyler Kroft had a drop. So there were a lot of guys that dropped passes in that game. And, Andy Dalton's throwing the ball 54 times. It's rainy. I get it. It's tough to hang on to that football, but on the road with the Steelers having the same issues, you can't commit those same unforced errors, and that disallows your team to get points. It stalls drives, and you just can't have it. The other takeaway, and I know Connor touched on it a little bit in his opening, but the one major takeaway, unfortunately, that I had in this game is the horrible officiating. And I really don't like to be the guy that likes to say, the outcome of this game was determined by the referees. I still hesitate to say that in this game, but the Tyler Boyd fumble that probably shouldn't have been a fumble. There was another fumble on special teams that the Bengals recovered that it was inexplicably blown dead, and the Bengals couldn't challenge that play. There was a number of late hits and targeting plays by the Steelers that weren't called, a ton of holds on the offensive line by Pittsburgh that weren't called. And then it went against Pittsburgh as well. There were two pretty bad pass interference penalties that gave the Bengals a field goal, later in the game too. So, Connor, just I'll go back to you because you started on this topic a little bit. Is this being overblown in your eyes, or was did it really stick in your craw and say, this really determined the outcome of the game? These calls or non-calls determine the outcome of this game.
I mean, if you look at the comments on Cincy Jungle, it's definitely being overblown. And I don't know on a national perspective, how it's being overblown, but we wrote a post on the game. I think I wrote 2 posts on Sunday, and both of them just went crazy. And both of them had, I think, 300, 400 comments, and half of those or more were just the NFL is rigged in the Steelers' favor. The NFL is rigged against the Bengals. All of this stuff. Don't get me wrong; it was bad officiating. There were, like you said, AC, there were plenty of missed calls, especially it seemed against the Bengals. But even there were some of the Steelers should have gotten in their favor as well. But it just seemed as a result from the referees kind of just saying. That's what really didn't make sense to me, is because you would think the referees to control the game would be the ones that are saying, all right, we're going to call all these penalties, but they really didn't. They just let the teams do what they were going to do, and the teams just happened to not really get, a couple of players got over the top. Mike Mitchell had one where you could really tell he was trying to target AJ Green, and he didn't end up making contact, so you can't really call a penalty on that.
That was terrible.
That one was really, really ugly. That was blatantly him just trying to launch himself into his helmet, which was really messed up. But you can't flag that. And there's really just a lot of, it really didn't make sense what they were trying to do, because they did end up effectively controlling the game and not letting emotions get too high or players get out of line. But in the same sense, there were plenty of calls that should have been called. And it just really didn't make that much sense. So was it being overblown? Yes, in the sense that people are taking the one poorly officiated game and turning it into the Bengals have never won a game off of poor officiating. They've never had a call go their way. All this exaggeration. But I mean, I think the people who, and not that people who believe that aren't sensible or don't have a solid argument their way. Every fan base is entitled to believe whatever it wants to believe. But I just think that at some point in the week, it's Wednesday now, the game was, 3 days ago. At some point, you just need to drop it and say, okay, we lost. That wasn't a game the Bengals played that they really deserved to win anyways. So you might as well take the loss on a bad call in the game that they really shouldn't have won anyway. I mean, what did the Bengals do well on Sunday besides shut down Antonio Brown? They couldn't run the ball. They dropped, like we said, they dropped 8 passes. Their offensive line wasn't super effective. Their defensive line got good pressure and got held. And that's really the one thing that was really frustrating, was that it seemed like there was a hold on nearly every play. But, I mean, the Bengals didn't win the turnover battle. They didn't win the battle of field position. They didn't move the ball. And, I mean, it was a bad game by the refs, but no one got hurt. And the Bengals are still 1-1. They haven't played a home game yet. So, I mean, it was overblown. I hope you understand it's just relative, but I definitely understand where people are coming from on that one.
Scott, I don't know if you are one that would cue the X-Files theme song in some of this stuff, but you look at the missed calls in the playoff game that a lot of Bengals fans were complaining about, and a lot of them went the Steelers' way, and you see it again in this game, a game which the NFL and this officiating crew said they were going to be on high alert. Now, granted, there weren't so many of the cheap shots that we saw maybe in the wild card game and in other recent games, but there were some instances of targeting late hits. Andy Dalton took a real bad one to the back, I think by Stephon Tuitt, knocked his helmet off well after the throw and did not get called. So there's just a myriad of calls. And Connor's right. There were a lot of things that the Bengals didn't do well enough to win, but when you start piling up these calls, it makes you wonder, what side are you on? Are you on the it is what it is, and the Bengals didn't play well anyway, and they should have lost? Or do you think this directly played into the result of the game?
I think it's got to be a mix of both. I mean, you could argue that, they always say, usually coaches that speak very well politically correct will make a comment that, hey, if we need to put ourselves in a situation where the refs can't lose it for us. And the Bengals clearly did not do that. But, when you have so much parity, it's kind of hard to do. You're on a road game, NFL, against a good team. It's very hard to put yourself in a situation where you can just truly get away from any influence of the referees. And it's 2 straight games, like you mentioned, where the Bengals have played the Steelers, and the officiating has seemed to be very one-sided against the Bengals. And then that raises a question, and we've seen that before. There were questions last year with the Tyler Eifert catch that they called a non-catch. There was at the time that it was called a non-catch was a big controversy, and you get that a lot, where it's like, okay, if you see enough things happen one way, is there something going on behind the scenes, or is it just kind of, it's just dumb luck? But when the dumb luck happens to the same people over and over, and then you get in the whole thing of, well, it's a conspiracy, but history usually ends up proving out that many conspiracies actually turned out to be true. They just seemed silly at the time, until you just have to look at the evidence over and over. And interestingly, a week ago, I don't know if he intended it or not, but Marvin Lewis even made a comment that could be interpreted kind of that way. He was talking about some of the rule changes the NFL has done to try to influence the game, try to affect the game, try to make it more even, where you didn't have teams that were 0-16 or teams that were 16-0, but the games where the NFL was actively trying to make the scores closer, games more competitive by how they were tweaking the rules. And you think about it, well, it kind of makes sense, because even just from a profit perspective, if you can keep the games all fairly close, very interesting, viewers are going to watch it longer. They watch it longer. You get more money from advertisements, because you have people, aren't tuning out in the fourth quarter. And at the stadium, people are staying longer. So you have people, buying more, $10 beers and whatever. So from a pure money perspective, it makes sense. And then also, I think recently we had some posts about the valuation, how the Bengals are one of the least valued teams. And I think the Cowboys usually up at number 1. And which teams are, and obviously it'd make more sense. The NFL would prefer, all things being equal, to have your more valued teams being in the postseason and advancing, because that's who people are going to tune in for. And I think it's one of the reasons why baseball has never instituted, well, one of many reasons why they've never had a salary cap, but one of them would be it makes no sense for them, because they get more money by having the big money teams like the Yankees and Red Sox always buying the best players to always get in the playoffs, because you want to see them in there, because you get more viewers, you get more money. So I can't say I'm absolutely convinced there's a conspiracy, but I think there's enough circumstantial evidence that you could throw it out as a possibility without being branded as some sort of crazy person with the tinfoil hat.
I struggle with it, to be honest with you. I struggle with it, and I think I struggle with it because of what I've seen the last handful of games in this rivalry. And you've seen the refs be flag happy, and for some reason this time, and sometimes being flag happy can be super frustrating, but if you're flag happy and making the right calls, then that's the way it goes. But I saw a lot of egregious penalties, particularly by Pittsburgh. There were a couple by the Bengals that either weren't called or that went against Pittsburgh that went the Bengals' way. But particularly against Pittsburgh, there was a late hit on Uzama, as I said. There's a late hit on Dalton, fumbles, all that stuff that just seemed to be glaring errors by the officiating staff. And, I don't want to say that the Bengals would have won the game with a different officiating staff or a different approach in this game. Who knows? Tyler Boyd hangs onto that ball, and Andy Dalton the very next play throws an interception anyways, whatever. But it was one of the worst displays of officiating I've ever seen in a very, very long time. And it was one of the things, unfortunately, that jumped out in the game. And usually officiating, you kind of say, oh, there's a bad call here and there. But, this was one game in particular where I just noticed it really jump off the page. Scott, you look like you had something else to say.
I just find it very interesting. You talk about how horribly officiated the game was, and Vontaze Burfict wasn't even playing.
Yep.
And I think we could probably all agree if he was in there,
it'd be even different. Yeah, even more different.
As bad as it was, how much more worse would it be?
Yep.
And of course, the national media would just be saying, "Well, he's a headhunter." You know, all those penalties are legit when they're called on him.
And they'd acknowledge the fact that the game happened. I mean, I think that's one thing that fans are really ignoring, fans are frustrated with, and that the media is ignoring, is that like this game did happen, and there were so many things that fans wish got called, whether the NFL wants to accept that or not. And it seems as though the NFL kind of acknowledged it and kind of was like, okay, yeah, the Bengals kind of got jobbed on that one. But no one, like not even like CBS or, Fox, no one's talking about it. So I think that's one reason why, like I'm personally, like I said, not like a conspiracy theorist, but it makes perfect sense why someone would be, because like it just seems like it happens every single time the Bengals play the Steelers. It seems like every time it's a big game, whatever it is. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I get where people are coming from on that one.
So what are your thoughts, listeners? You can leave a comment for us and download the show on iTunes. We're official and we are on iTunes. You can leave a comment on Cincy Jungle as this is posted, and you can also contact us on Twitter at BengalsOBI, or you can email us at theobinsider@gmail.com with your questions, your comments on this segment. And let us know how you're feeling about it. Are you still sour about this loss? Are you moving on to Sunday and leaving this one in the rear view, so to speak? We look forward to hearing from you. Good stuff, guys. Just real quick, we're going to make some updates on this week from players, as the team is now gearing up for the Denver Broncos, who are coming into Paul Brown Stadium this week. There's a bit of bad news and good news, probably, I guess we'll start with the good news. The best news is that Tyler Eifert is back practicing, and some feel it's a little later than one would think. Some feel that it's maybe right around the correct timetable, but he's back. It's unknown if he's going to play this week against the Broncos, but him practicing on a Wednesday and not so much maybe on a Thursday or Friday, getting that work in earlier in the week is a good sign. The Bengals tend to be a little conservative on some of these guys as they come back from injuries, especially their star guys. They might try and gauge whether Eifert's in quote-unquote game shape. He's been doing a lot of stuff on the rehab field, though. I think he's been lifting weights and all of that stuff. So he should be in relatively decent shape, but he is back at practice, so that's good news there. The Bengals might suit him up this Sunday, but we don't know. Some people are thinking that's kind of a doubtful thing. CJ Uzoma wasn't practicing. He did take quite a few hits on some plays last week. Maybe that has something to do with it. It's been a little bit unclear. Andrew Whitworth got a veteran rest day. And unfortunately, Darqueze Dennard was also out of the lineup as well, out of practice as well, which is not a good sign. He's a little dinged up this week. One other piece of good news, and it's not so much playing related, but apparently Bengals star wide receiver AJ Green had his wife gave birth to their son, Easton Ace Green, on Wednesday. So congratulations to AJ Green. That's awesome stuff. And selfishly speaking, it's nice that he probably won't be missing a game, especially an important one against the Broncos. But it would be understandable if he needed to, with obviously the birth of his son. But congratulations to the Greens and the birth of their son there. So those are some updates on players and the Bengals as they head into the Broncos. So guys, let's talk about the Broncos game. I don't know really what to make and think of this game, to be quite honest with you. The Denver Broncos, a team that a lot of people thought would be pretty horrible this year because of their quarterback situation and a lot of other losses on their defense, which was, I would say, probably the best in 2015. A lot of people thought they would really struggle this year. And especially them, they played the reigning NFC champions in the Carolina Panthers, and they've played the Indianapolis Colts with Andrew Luck now back in the lineup. Somehow, with Trevor Siemian at quarterback, and his throwing of 1 touchdown against 3 interceptions in 2 games, and them playing these difficult teams, they are 2-0, and they head to Cincinnati at 2-0. The Bengals, obviously, we mentioned, are 1-1. They lost to the Steelers. They got that good win against the Jets. Two good teams they faced, but for the first time, they're at home, and for the first time, Denver is on the road. So, Scott, I'll start with you. Is there such a thing as a must-win game in Week 3 of an NFL season? And if so, is this one for the Bengals given the tough stretch that they started with this year?
I'd say, personally, I think every game is a must-win in the NFL, at least until you lock up the playoff spot. So I'm going to say in that regard, every game is a must-win. I'm probably going to be on the minority on this one, but I really don't think Denver is as good as everyone is kind of hyping them to be. I guess the way I'm looking at it is they beat Carolina, which obviously is a Super Bowl rematch, but it was a 1-point game. It was at home. They barely won. There were some questionable calls in the game. Yeah, some people were kind of like, well, it was a first game of the year, and teams are still kind of getting into it, and so they kind of barely won. Then the next week they play the Colts, who they win by 2 touchdowns, but they get 2 defensive touchdowns. So again, another very close game, barely win. Kind of struggled, and the Colts are 0-2. I think they lost to Detroit at home. So it's hard to say the Colts are the team that everyone keeps thinking they're going to be. Last year and this year, they just don't seem to be the same team everyone kind of figured they'd be in Andrew Luck's first couple years. So I'm kind of looking at the Broncos as like, yeah, they're 2-0, but I think they're playing with borrowed time. You mentioned the quarterback. He's really struggled, and I think the one thing that really hasn't been exploited yet, because they've been in these close games, been playing at home, kind of had that home field advantage. They've been able to run the ball well enough. The defense has done enough that they've been able to mask the deficiencies, and that's where I think that's one thing the Bengals really should take an advantage of, is the fact that despite the fact that we only have 1 sack this year, 2 sacks, we do have a good defensive line that I'm hoping eventually shows up. And so I think we can really force Simeon to have to make those throws and have to win that game for them. And I think that's where we can really, hey, you guys have to play on the road this year with your new rookie quarterback who's really struggling. Yeah, let's see what the Broncos are really made of. And I think that's where I think the Bengals win this one, and I think a lot of the national media people are going to be wrong on this. I'm hoping. I mean, I'm a Bengals fan. I'm obviously hoping.
So, Connor, I do want to get your take on if this is a must-win game for the Bengals in Week 3. But check out this stat going into this game. I'm going to throw a couple of stats at you. Actually, in the last 4 games, Denver's defense has allowed a combined passer rating of 60.6 to Cam Newton, who they played twice, Tom Brady, and Andrew Luck. Denver is 4-0 in those games. Additionally, the Broncos have forced 9 turnovers in those 4 games, with 3 of them being returns for touchdowns. I want to get your take on, like I said, if this is a must-win game for the Bengals. And I also want to kind of get your thoughts on those stats in particular, because the defense has obviously been carrying the Denver Broncos really from the last part of last season up into this season.
Yeah, I mean, first off, if we're going to go must win, I feel like I'm going to take the opposite of approaches of Scott here and just say, I mean, I felt this way before Scott even answered the question. I'm not just being a contrarian here, but if you're looking at the grand scheme of things, the Bengals have a really hard first half of their schedule. They play the majority of the good teams on their schedule in the first half of the season. Generally, the way the Bengals play this season is they get out to a really hot start, as evidenced by last year's 8-0 start. I think they started something like 5-2-1 or something like that in the year before. They generally play really well in the beginning, and they kind of slow down towards the end. And I think that would have changed last year if Dalton didn't get hurt. But that being said, Cincinnati is just one of those teams where they can just win any game, and it's just going to take the team showing up. I don't think it's a must win. I think it would be probably a more painful loss than losing to Pittsburgh, actually easily a more painful loss than losing to Pittsburgh, because of kind of what you mentioned, is that Trevor Siemian is the quarterback, and whether or not the Broncos have a great team around him, which I think they do, doesn't really matter in the eye of the national media. But like Scott said, I kind of agree there. I think the Broncos aren't as good of a team as people are making them out to be. Like we mentioned, they lost their first game on they won on a missed field goal against Carolina. Last week, Indy, they lost by multiple scores, but they were driving to win the game before Andrew Luck got strip sacked, and then Shane Ray, I think, was the guy who returned it for a touchdown. The stat you mentioned was really, really interesting, AC, with especially considering all of the scores they've gotten on defense. I remember Scott mentioning that on Fantasy Insider a few weeks ago about defenses, and that you just can't trust a defense to get all of these returns for touchdown, and that's what helps a fantasy defense. But in real life, that's what the Broncos are doing. And I remember it was either last year or the year before. No, it was 2 years ago. I think it was Aqib Talib who picked off Andy Dalton for a pick six. And fortunately for Cincinnati, Jeremy Hill had that super long, I think it was like 83, 93-yard touchdown run that really sparked the comeback. But the game looked pretty out of hand in the first quarter before that happened. I believe AJ he went out on an injury on that actual exact play. That all being said, I think the Bengals can win this. I think they should win this. The Broncos are, I think, a decent, not great team. They've won 2 games. They've gotten by, but it's just going to take the Bengals getting to the quarterback, which I think is very possible. The Broncos' right tackle, Donald Stevenson's out, which means Carlos Dunlap's facing Michael Schofield, shares the name with the great Prison Break character. But Michael Schofield, the guy who gave up 3 sacks to Carlos Dunlap last year in a game where Dunlap broke the franchise official record for sacks in a season and in a career, because Eddie Edwards, a lot of those sacks that he had didn't count. So, I mean, I don't know. I just think that it's definitely they should win the game. Like, I get the whole emphasis of they really need to win this game. They do need this to get back on the momentum. I believe they play New England in week 5 or 6 or so. But the Broncos are a team where the Bengals need to take care of this, because you never know with tiebreaker implications. It's definitely a more important game, I'll say that. But all in all, I think it's a game where the Bengals match up well. You have the Broncos have their great receivers, but Dre and Adam Jones have really done a great job shutting teams' receivers down so far this season. CJ Anderson had a great game in week 1. Wasn't as hot in week 2. I think that Cincinnati can hopefully contain him. And then obviously last week with the defense, they played well, but the offense didn't play well. Trevor Siemian hasn't looked great. And people say, oh, well, he played decent last week. I heard on another podcast, I think it was Around the NFL podcast, I'm pretty sure, the NFL Network's Chris Wessling said, they were talking about, oh, well, Siemian looked pretty good this week. And Wessling said, well, this is an anomaly. The Colts don't even have an NFL start caliber quarterback on their roster right now. I mean, preseason week 4, the Bengals played the Colts and they had 6 corners on their injury list. So, I mean, I just think this is a stingy Bengals defense that people are sleeping on really hard. I think the offense needs to get the job done. This is really a week where the offense needs to get the job done. Andy can't turn the ball over. They need to just get momentum. So it's definitely an important game.
I guess I'd lean more to the extremist with the Bengals, just because I've seen quite a few different things in my time following this team and in the years writing for the team for Cincy Jungle. But I don't want – it's hard for me to say, yes, must win. But I feel like this tough 3-game schedule and the fact that the Bengals are coming off a loss, it's their home opener – I kind of feel like it is a little bit of a must win. And one of the major reasons why is because these are the types of teams that the Bengals have historically struggled to beat. The elite franchises, the teams that are perennial playoff teams. The Bengals, granted, this is a game at 1 p.m. Eastern on Sunday where the Bengals tend to play a little bit better than on primetime. But these are the teams that they struggle to beat. You know, they can beat the sub 500 teams with ease. And a lot of those teams in that 8-0 start from last year, Connor, a lot of those teams, granted there was a win against Pittsburgh, but a lot of those teams were teams that didn't end up making the playoffs last year. You know, you had your tight, you know, all these different teams, right? And I just want to see this team start to really assert itself against the other NFL powerhouses. I think a lot of a lot of fans and a lot of NFL insiders regard the Bengals as a good team and quite possibly a very good team, but a lot of people probably aren't going to pick them to win this game because this is the type of team they tend to lose to, whether it's on the primetime stage or on this type of stage. So just to get out of this rough stretch at 2-1 and to beat a team that is consistently good in the Denver Broncos and who has surprised a lot of people by going 2-0 to start this season, it's definitely not going to derail the Bengals season if they lose, but they got to dig themselves out of a pretty big hole at this point, especially with a lot of offseason questions going into the team and personnel losses, the loss of Hugh Jackson, all of that stuff. Those questions will start to surface more, especially if the Bengals struggle on offense and lose against Denver at home in their opener. So I think it's a bit of a must-win game. It's not going to end their season by any means, but I think it could be a turning point in their season and determine where they go from that point. Those are our thoughts on the Broncos preview. So fans, listeners, get in touch with us again at Bengals OBI on Twitter. The OB Insider at gmail.com is our email address. And you can also leave a comment on Cincy Jungle. You can also contact us and, like I said, leave a comment, leave feedback on iTunes, all of that good stuff as well. So good stuff from you guys. We haven't done this segment for a couple of weeks. And now that people have kind of started to get a little bit of their bearings down in their fantasy leagues and setting their lineups and seeing who's surprised, who has disappointed, going now into week 3, people are kind of keeping their eyes on everything fantasy football. So we have the Fantasy Football Insider once again with Scott. And Scott, you have some information that you'd like to share that could get some of us out of the hole. I personally am 1-1 in my league. Some frustrating players and performances, some really pleasantly surprising players on my own team. But what do you have for us this week?
Yeah, well, you mentioned the players doing well and doing poorly, and that's basically what I have this week. On our Cincy Jungle site, we have a lot of good posts that are done as far as waiver ads and picks. So I'm going to kind of look at it a little differently and kind of look at the approach of maybe more trade targets and kind of look at, now that we are 2 weeks into the season, we've seen some really highly regarded players who have failed to really live up to expectations, like Todd Gurley. And we've had a few players who have really overachieved much higher than they were expected to. Someone like the indomitable Willie Snead for the Saints. And then on the flip side, you have some guys who have really struggled to turn it around. Or you have guys who are just really, guys who are really, of the guys who are struggling, got my mind thinking. Okay, so of the guys who are really struggling, sometimes they're going to turn it around. They have a slow start. And other times they just, they're in for a crap season. Like Andrew Luck last year is a good example of that. He started really rough, but people kept starting him. Nope, he's going to get it. And he just, the wheels fell off and he got hurt. And then you have other guys who you really didn't expect much from, and they emerge and have these great starts. And then the thing you have to try to figure out as well, are they going to come back to earth? Is it a fluke or is it legit? And a good example of that's Devonta Freeman last year. He was, many leagues wasn't drafted. He was supposed to be the backup. Tevin Coleman got hurt. Like, okay, he had a hot, game or two, and then he ends up, with 1,500 rushing yards or something, some ridiculous number like that. So now that we're 2 weeks in, we've had guys who have done well, guys who have struggled. So what I'm trying to do is, with segment this week is, okay, let's look at these guys and see who seems to be legit. Are they sustainable? Are they guys who really seem like someone who's going to keep it up or not? And then if you're looking at possibly trading for people, you obviously want to buy low and sell high. So the idea is if someone started hot and you don't think they're going to sustain it, yet someone you'd try to want to trade away. And conversely, if someone started cold and you think they're going to improve, then you'd want to try to get them for the cheap. But of course, as probably anyone knows, trading in fantasy football is nearly impossible since everyone always loves their team more than the opponents. And for probably every 10 projected or proposed trade, you get one that goes through. And so it's a very difficult thing. guy may be the worst guy in the world. As soon as he's on your team, he is a stud, future Hall of Famer, and you are not going to let him go without giving up the banks. Anyway, with that in mind, we have as on like running backs, receivers, and tight ends. So starting with running backs, some very interesting names in the top 5 this year. And I'll pair the first 2 together. D'Angelo Williams and Spencer Ware. They're currently number 1 and number 5. And so are they going to sustain it? And for them, I'm going to be Mr. Negative and go big fat no. And the reason is they are basically only as good as their starters are. So there's someone, if you're in a league with people who maybe aren't as familiar with fantasy and you're playing with, I don't know, relatives or cousins or people who have to ask you what the difference is between football and baseball, they might be good people to try to trade to them because they wouldn't realize that, Le'Veon Bell's coming back in a week. And
that's what I was just going to say. Yeah.
Yeah. And same with Jamal Charles. So, yeah, those guys are ones I'm going to say I don't see us sustaining it. Another one, guy who's currently number 2 is Matt Forte. Before the season, he was kind of drafted 2nd, 3rd round because he was going to split with Bilal Powell, and now all of a sudden he's number 2. And for him, I'm also going to say no, just because he's a 31-year-old guy and he's on pace for 416 carries, which is even back in the day, 416 carries is pretty unheard of, especially for someone that old.
That's a ton.
Yeah, and last few years he's kind of on the way down. He got hurt a few games last year. He's been an under 4 yards per carry kind of a guy. I think he's going to be a decent producer. They've shown they're going to give him the volume, but yeah, I just don't see that number 2 rank sustaining. He's maybe a 2nd running back, but yeah, definitely not that level. Next one, the guy at Bengals are playing, C.J. Anderson, currently ranked number 3, another guy who is kind of taken 2nd, 3rd round. And I'm actually going to say yes to him, only because he can run the ball, he can catch the ball. The defense is a very good defense, so the offense is going to get on the field quite a bit. He's never really been overused because he's been split. And now they have the new offensive system, and they want to run more, and they want to run with one guy, who I think he's going to be the guy. He tends to be a good yard per carry guy. I don't think he'll finish as like the number 3 guy, but I do think he'll end up as a very legitimate guy when it's all said and done. And then the last running back I wanted to mention was Melvin Gordon, another guy who was drafted high last year in the real draft. I think the Chargers traded up for him. Kind of had the abysmal year, no touchdowns, had some fumbles, kind of got in the doghouse. He's another one who I'm going to say yes. I think he's going to keep up. I don't think he's going to finish with the 24 touchdowns, which he's on pace for right now. But one thing to consider is the Chargers threw to Danny Woodhead over 100 times last year. And Woodhead's gone, so someone's going to pick up some of that. And it's obviously not going to be Keenan Allen.
They just signed Dexter McCluster.
Did they? So I'd say Gordon's going to get a uptick in production, probably more production than he's been getting, at least as far as targets or touches. So I think he's a very good candidate to keep up what he started.
Worth pointing out, 3rd string Brandon Oliver also out for the year, I believe.
Is he? I remember a couple years ago, I think he was a big Ryan Matthews and Donald Brown thief. Wide receivers, another one where the top 5 or 10 are filled with some very interesting names. Like I mentioned earlier, Willie Snead is number 2. Is he going to keep it up? I'm going to go with no, just because you look at the Saints, they're 0-2 this year. They have multiple targets. They have a Fleener who hasn't gotten really involved yet. Michael Thomas, the rookie from Ohio State. He's going to keep developing and get more targets. Brandon Cooks is obviously a top option there. So at the end of the day, I think he's on a good offense. They're going to throw a lot. He'll probably be a 2nd receiver, but probably not worth he's not going to finish year number 2. He's not going to be up in the Julio Jones, Antonio Brown category. And then you look at number 3, Stefan Diggs, who kind of came out of nowhere, was a late round pick out of Maryland a year ago. After a couple weeks, he's just been phenomenal this year. I think he has like 250, 300 yards, a couple of touchdowns. Again, I'm going to say no. And I think there's a James Bond movie called Dr. No, who I might be emulating. But yeah, I'm just the no guy today. If you look at his first 4 weeks last year, he was on pace for 100 yards, I think 100 catches, 1,700 yards and 8 touchdowns. He finished the year with half of that. So he nowhere near his pace. This year, kind of the same thing. He's on that really hot pace to start the season, and he's in a worse situation this year. They're on their backup quarterback. They just lost their left tackle, Matt Khalil. They don't have Adrian Peterson, who's probably going to miss most, if not all, the year. So I think I just don't see him finishing as a top 3. Next guy I do see doing well, which is Larry Fitzgerald, who's currently number 4. I know a lot of people kept expecting, well, Malcolm Floyd, John Brown, they're going to bring the younger guys in. They're going to kind of phase them out. But last year they moved him to that new position. They changed his role in the offense, and he had a huge season. And this year he's kind of picked up where he left off. So he's someone I think that, yeah, he's pretty legit, who's going to be a top, I don't know, 10, 20 running or receiver, someone closer to where he's kind of at right now. The next 2 I'll kind of pair together, the last 2 receivers, Mike Wallace and Corey Coleman. I'm going to say hell no on them. Mike Wallace has 3 touchdowns on 7 catches. That's just totally unsustainable. Someone's going to add him on as a waiver. Someone's going to try to trade for him. If you have him and someone wants him, by all means, see whatever you can get for him, because that he may only end up the year with 3 touchdowns. Corey Coleman just hurt his hand. Cleveland's on their 3rd quarterback, and he's averaging a ridiculous 25 yards per catch. So unless you think Cody Kessler is the next Tom Brady and you can catch with one hand. I know Odell Beckham's shown you can catch with one hand. I'm going to say Coleman and Wallace are definitely 2 not to consider. And then tight ends. I have 2 tight ends, and I'm just going to say right now they're a big fat no. One is Vance McDonald. He has 2 touchdowns on 3 catches this year. And I think he had a 75-yarder and another one that if you go back far enough in Bengals history, they had a backup tight end. I think it was Matt Schobel, who had a fluke end of a game, 70, 80-yard touchdown catch. So he ended the game with like 14 points. The very next week, in every league, he was scooped up like, wow, his tight end got 14 points. This is amazing. I think it was his only touchdown all season. So you kind of have to look at their situation, and that's kind of what the next 2 guys who I've paired together, which is Jack Doyle and Dwayne Allen. 2 top 10 tight ends right now. Andrew Luck has 5 touchdown passes, and only 1 is going to a wide receiver. So they're kind of benefiting from that. Obviously, that isn't going to continue. And they both just have a very ridiculous touchdown to reception rate. And if you look at when Gronkowski had his 17 touchdown year back in 2011, he had 19% of his catches went for touchdowns. Right now, Doyle and Alexander have a higher rate. So you can argue that's not a very sustainable number. So if someone's trying to trade you them, I'd definitely pass. I think they could be decent, but not where they're currently playing at. So I guess for this week, that's the big thing I'd look at is just recommend if you're looking at trades, kind of look at guys who are starting hot, starting cold, and try to ask yourself, based on their situation, which ones do you think are going to continue and which ones do you think are going to flop? And then obviously you want to try to get the guys who you think are poised to turned around, and you want to try to unload the guys who you think might be a flash in the pan before they fizzle out.
Okay, so Scott, real quick, you threw a lot at us, and I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, and it is a bit of a selfish question on my part, both because I have both guys on my team, but one player is a Bengals player. Just kind of a quick response. Be patient or impatient with Titans running back Derrick Henry and Bengals running back Jeremy Hill.
I'd say Hill I'd be patient with because there's no trade value right now.
And he's more of a goal line guy, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're just not going to get anything for him because he has like 20 carries for 50-some yards, and he does have the 1 touchdown. The one nice thing with Hill is they played 2 very difficult teams to run against. The Bengals always struggle running against Pittsburgh. The Jets have the insane front 4, and once they get through Denver, they're kind of through the roughest part as far as opposing teams to run against. And
all kind of those diverse defenses that they bring looks up front,
so he's one openings up too.
So he's definitely someone I'd hold on to because he has no trade value and he can only improve, and I think he will improve. One nice thing is he has receiving yards this year. They kind of showed it in preseason and so far this year. They're willing to throw to him this year, and so I think he can give you a little more than he did last year as far as usage. once they can get this whole offensive running thing figured out. And the other guy you mentioned was Derrick Henry. He's someone that's interesting, I think. If you look at him and DeMarco Murray, Henry's really starting to eat into DeMarco Murray's touches. And I think by the end of the year, they could probably be a 50-50, or he might even replace him because they've been using Murray a lot to catch the ball. So I don't know if they would even get to a point where Henry replaces him as far as number of rushes or being the main guy. But he's definitely someone I'd say for now, I'd probably hold on to and maybe watch, especially with Murray having something of a high usage injury history that you never know when he's going out.
Yep. Okay. Well, good stuff, Scott. Appreciate it. That's the Fantasy Football Insider with Scott Schulte, a pretty frequent segment that we have here on the Orange and Black Insider. If you have questions for Scott, do you have a Twitter handle that people can ask you, or email, or if in case they have some fantasy questions?
I'm very old fashioned. I still have the phone with the rotary dial.
Oh, there you go. Okay. Well, you know what? If you do have fantasy questions, let's do it this way then. If you do have fantasy questions for Scott Schulte, you can tweet us at BengalsOBI, email us at theorangeandblackinsider@gmail.com, leave the comments in iTunes, and those that could be more ammunition for you as this segment goes forward, Scott. But good stuff.
Yeah, and we've been very happy to answer questions in future episodes of our podcast.
Yep. So moving on, let's kind of start wrapping this up a little bit. We've been going for a little while here. Let's take one more look back at the Denver game. Connor, I'll start with you. Give me one player matchup that you're looking at as the Bengals host the Broncos this week, as well as a score prediction and how you see the game playing out this Sunday at Paul Brown Stadium.
I'll go with a score prediction first. I totally forgot about a stat that I had in my head, and I'm 99% sure this is exactly what the stat is. Didn't read it or anything, just came to my head when we were talking earlier. Bengals, I believe, lost by 8 points to Pittsburgh. 99% sure on that.
Yeah, there you go.
Which means that
24-16, yeah.
Yeah, 24-16. So every single loss, minus the game when Andy Dalton got hurt last year and left the game, has been decided by one possession. They lost to the Cardinals by, I think, 3-ish. They lost to the Texans by one possession. Every single loss except the Pittsburgh loss last year, the one, not the playoff loss, but the one before that, was decided by 8 points or fewer. Last year, they were all decided by, I'm pretty sure, 3 or 4 points. So this one's, if the Bengals are, and the Broncos are one of those teams where they really like to play close. They kind of set their team up to win or lose based on a close game. They're not going to, it's just the way things are. They barely beat the Browns last year. They barely beat the Raiders. I think they lost the Raiders last year. Every game they play seems to be close. So I think this is definitely going to be a fun game to watch. That said, you talk matchups. I can't ever go with one, so I'm going to go with a one matchup that's kind of a position group matchup. And I'm going to go Bengals corners versus Broncos receivers. I love what I've seen, like I said, from Dre Kirkpatrick, and obviously Adam Jones is still Adam Jones, at least to this point. I really, really, really believe Dre Kirkpatrick is going to be the answer as the long-term number one corner after, Pac-Man retires, or he already has been on the left side, which is generally where the kind of number one, if you will, corner plays for the past couple of seasons. So I really like what I've seen from them. I'm excited to see what they do against Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas. I think that duo of receivers, while very talented, is definitely kind of sliding downhill quietly. They're still definitely one of the best 1-2 punches at wide receiver in the NFL, but they're not the pair they once were, especially considering they don't have 2013 Peyton Manning throwing them passes anymore. So that's one where I think you really need to see the corner step up and get some turnovers. I know some people didn't like the Adam Jones interception on fourth down because they were thinking, oh, well, they would have had better field position if he just didn't catch it at all. I personally didn't mind it because, take the
turnover.
Yeah, you take the turnover, get in the quarterback's head. I think people don't really think about that as much. Ben Roethlisberger, obviously, the next time he goes out into the field, he's thinking about the fact that he just threw an interception. And what do you know? Dre Kirkpatrick intercepted a pass either on the next drive or the one after that. So you need the corners to make turnovers, and I think kind of tied into that, you need the safeties to make plays and hold their coverage. Make sure. I think one thing that was really interesting with the Steelers is that they had Sammy Coates, who burned Darqueze Dennard. And the Jets had, Quincy Enunwa he's not a burner or anything, but he just seemed to make plays. The number threes have really been making plays a lot, but Sammy Coates really wouldn't have been able to do anything if Sean Williams didn't, blow coverage on both those plays. And obviously Darqueze Dennard needs to be closer in coverage on that as well. But the point I'm trying to make, I guess, is that you have DT and you have Emmanuel Sanders. If you can shut those guys down, the Broncos don't have, Sammy Coates, in the sense that they don't have a guy who's going to burn you deep. I think their guys are Jordan Norwood, I think is his name or something, and Benny Fowler. I don't even know who their third receiver is, to be honest. And it's just a matter of they don't have that impact guy who can stretch the field vertically. They might have a better number 3 receiver in terms of comparing them to other teams, but they don't have that burner, which I think if you can lock down the 1 and 2, that's really going to set you up, and then you can really focus in on the run game and rush the passers. So I'm looking forward to that matchup.
It's in regards to the Jones interception, it also plays into the quarterback's head in the fact that was a pretty poor pass by Roethlisberger. The weather was poor. And so, that really kind of is like, I don't know if I could throw that type of route again in this weather, especially with Adam Jones on the other side. And your point about Kirkpatrick, he's really showing growth this year already with 1 interception. He's surpassed his 2015 total. So there's a thumbs up to Dre right there. But, if the Bengals hang on to him and Dre continues to get his starter legs under him, and then you have William Jackson III, who looks like an insanely talented guy. The outlook at that position looks pretty strong. We are going to have a little bit of a debate next week. Well, we have a date next week for the show, I guess, too. But we're going to have a debate next week based on some performances we're going to see from Darqueze Dennard and Josh Shaw. I think that's going to be an interesting topic, especially considering if Dennard ends up playing this week with another injury, and if he does, if he's going to struggle the same way he did against the Steelers and Sammy Coates there. Scott, your score prediction and maybe a one-on-one player matchup. You could go position group as well, like Connor did, but a matchup you're really looking forward to seeing this Sunday.
I'm going to say score. I'm going to go against Vegas and actually get the Bengals a 24-14 victory. Last week I was more pessimistic. I think I said 17-17 tie, which I would have been happy with compared to what we ended up with.
Yep.
So this time I'm going to say 24-14 because I was saying earlier, I think I'm just not convinced the Broncos are the team everyone's hyping them up to be. I think they're a solid team, good defense, but I think it's a team that we can match up well with Dalton in there, and I think it's a team we can beat. And I think if you look, I think their top tackler is their safety, so you can get in the secondary with the running game, and I think that would bode well if we can get our running game moving. And with I think Jackson now down in Jacksonville, open some things up in the middle and kind of get to that second level. Actually, I guess 2 matchups I'm looking forward to. One is a position group. It's the Broncos running backs against the Bengals defense, or our front 7. I think right now the Bengals are ranked dead last in the NFL in rushing yards allowed, something like 130 yards a game. Just some horrible number you wouldn't expect from the Bengals defense. And the Broncos with C.J. Anderson and Devontae Booker have run pretty well, which they've needed to because the quarterback hasn't exactly been the most efficient. So that's the thing I want to see is, can our defense stop that running? Can we stop a running back? We let Forte had some big runs against us, although they held D'Angelo Williams down in yards per attempt. I think it was like under 3 yards a carry, but they gave up a ton of carries because all the third downs completion. So they just kept feeding him the ball. So I'd like to see if we can stop a running back and just really shut him down. The second matchup I'm looking for is their Von Miller against Cedric Ogbuehi. DeMarcus Ware's out, so I think that's the one I kind of want to see. I think Miller already has like 4 sacks this year, and he's definitely a speed guy. And last year, the big knock on Andre Smith was always, well, he can't handle speed rushers, and Ogbuehi's in there, and he's supposed to be a more athletic guy, and who's still kind of ramping up, still kind of learning the system, learning the offense. But he's our starter; he's in there, so that's the thing I want to see. Because I think if we can win that battle, I think that's going to go a long way to helping the offense really move the ball. If He continues to get burned, we have to put extra people in there. If we can't stop Von Miller, that's going to force us into a lot of situations where Andy's getting pressured without getting blitzed, and so you have to dump the ball off or he gets sacked. And so that I think that's going to go a big way to see how our offense does. So I'm going to say Von Miller versus Boyhe, and then Broncos running backs against our defense.
Well, Scott, you cheated and you took multiple, and your latter was the one I was going to go with. So, that's okay. That's okay. I do agree with you, though. I did do a little research on Miller and his play against the Bengals. He has 4 sacks in 4 career games against the Bengals. And like you said, it was against Andre Smith. Andre Smith was the road grader. He was the real strong guy that could, make a lot of plays and still hold up against some of the bigger defensive ends. He played some pretty good football for the Bengals over the years, despite his many issues that he also had with the Bengals. But those speed guys, even against Whitworth sometimes now, because Elvis Doomerville has given Whitworth some fits as well. So that is one matchup that I will be watching this week. I guess I'm going to go just based on the drops last week and the issue, the fluidity with Eifert coming back into the lineup. He may or may not play this Sunday. I'm going to go with Tyler Boyd and Brandon LaFell against, I believe it's Chris Harris, the other good defensive back against on the Denver Broncos. And Harris is a guy that can play outside. He can play in the slot. And with Boyd and LaFell also interchanging those roles as well, I mean, you're going to undoubtedly have Talib on AJ Green, I would think. But the Denver corner, Chris Harris, not to be confused with the Bengals corner, Chris Lewis Harris, is a guy that's going to be covering Brandon LaFell and Tyler Boyd. Tyler Boyd had a very good game last week, and a lot of people will probably look at the fumble and say, well, that's obviously a big ding and a rookie mistake. You look at it and you say, well, that probably shouldn't have been a fumble anyway. So I think he finished with 6 catches for about 78 or 79 yards. Really did some good things across the middle of the field, which is what the Bengals want him to do. And LaFell didn't have anywhere near the kind of impact he had in the first game. I believe he had a drop as well, one of those 8. So he's probably looking to rebound. So that's going to be a matchup to watch, as well as I'm gonna also say Sean Williams and whatever his coverage duties are going to be on Sunday. He has been a guy that has just kind of struggled so far as a first-time full-time starter in the NFL. He did some spot duty with the Bengals and relieved Reggie Nelson and George Aloka, as both of them were in and out of the lineup over the past couple of years. But Reggie Nelson's absence has been felt, I think, especially last week in some of the plays that Connor mentioned in his deal. So I'm gonna give those kind of matchups there. Score, I'm gonna say 27-20. I think in favor of the Bengals, and I think they do get the win here. It's home opener. It's the first time the Bengals have taken the field of Paul Brown Stadium since they lost in that wild card game. I'm sure they want to make a very good impression to their fans and want to get a win, especially after losing such an emotional game last week. Whether you really saw it in some of the players' performance on the field or not, but I do think the Bengals come out on top. It'll probably be pretty tightly contested, especially because of the Broncos defense. 27 points might be a little high, but if the Bengals can get some of those turnovers of Trevor Siemian, who I think I mentioned earlier, I believe he has 1 touchdown pass and 3 interceptions in 2 games so far this year. If the Bengals can exploit a young quarterback who's starting his third career game, I think that's going to play into the Bengals' hands. Those are our predictions.
I never gave my score. I'm going 2017.
Okay, perfect. I would assume Bengals, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not refs.
2017 referees. That's a good one. That's going to do it for us tonight. And we appreciate you downloading the show. We appreciate your interaction on social media and on Cincy Jungle. We actually have some live viewers tuning into this show, believe it or not, guys, because YouTube Live pushes that out, and we have some loyal viewers who are tuning in live. And I don't know if our fan base knows that this show is recorded live. So we might be doing something special next week. We'll keep you in the loop on that. But thanks for all of your support in downloading the show. Gentlemen, thanks for your time and co-hosting this show as well.
As always.
Yep, good stuff from both of you tonight. I appreciate it. Let's hope the Bengals go 2-1. They have a tough one up ahead. And for those, I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, for those of you who don't know, I am traveling from Southern California early tomorrow to go to the Cincinnati Bengals Denver Broncos game. I will be in Cincinnati. So if you listen to this show, you read our material on Cincy Jungle, and you would like to meet up with me, I would love to meet up with you. I'll be with some family members and whatnot, but we would love to meet up with you, tailgate, hit the town with you the night before, all that good stuff. So definitely hit me up. Connor, Scott, I know you don't have a Twitter account, but Connor, where can they follow you on Twitter if they want to get some of your insight?
Yeah, if you don't live near Cincinnati / aren't going to the game, feel free, hit me up at How NFL. It's HOWE NFL. I'll give fantasy stuff too. I can be the Scott of the. If you ever need someone to hit up for fantasy advice, I like to help people out with that. So, yeah.
Don't hit me up for fantasy advice, but if you want to read my work, I'm at CJ Anthony CUI. And as we mentioned, you could also reach Scott through the many platforms of this show with his
smoke signals too.
It's right. Yeah. Smoke signals and all that good stuff. Thanks again, guys. Yeah, there you go. Snail mail. Again, download the show on iTunes and check it out on Cincy Jungle. Thank you so much for the support. I know it's still a new show. We're trying some new things out, but we've seemed to have gotten a lot of positive feedback, and we appreciate that. So thank you very much for the Orange and Black Insider, episode number 9. I'm Anthony Cosenza. Thank you again to my co-hosts, Connor Howe and Scott Schultze. Who Day, Week 3.
Who Day.
Who Day.